Welcome to United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America on WSGW. Now, here is your host, Kareem Bowen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. Well, so I hope that you all are having an amazing time. I am enjoying the ending and the closing of another year. It's amazing because it seems like I've been living my life Friday to Friday. I don't know about you, Jonathan. I got Jonathan John B. He's in the studio with me. John, what's going on?
Hello.
Am I the only one that seems like I've been living Friday to Friday?
I've been doing that, but I've been burning PTO, so I haven't had many Fridays.
Oh, is that what it is?
It's great.
For those of you who are listening, Jonathan is the hardest working man in radio as it relates here. That was something that a no DJ Tom Joyner used to say way back in the day. So I'm dating myself, but Jonathan is one of those guys who is continually working. You started off. When did you start, Jonathan? Because it seems like you started yesterday and now you run the station.
My first day was September 11th, 2021.
Wow.
Yep.
And so now let's share what exactly share with the audience what it is that you do now. You do a lot.
I think the main thing that I am probably the most proud of is I produce almost all of our local content here. Many of our local shows, United Shades of Gray being one of them. That's What She Said with Cristiana Malacara, Generating Gratitude with Joe Volk, and Mi Gente on Air with Larry Rodarte. And we're working on a couple other shows, one starting hopefully here in the new year that we'll have details coming out soon about. But I help out on the farm show.
Secrecy, the details.
Yeah. I help out with the Art Lewis show, scheduling guests. I'm all over the place. In the news department, I'm the afternoon anchor.
He does it all. So we're thankful for him. It was crazy because he came in just kind of as a part-time guy and showed himself, and now he's doing great things. So all of you that are listening out there, whether you're listening on WSGW at 100.5 FM or 790 AM, which is a simulcast, or you're listening at WJOL somewhere down there in Joliet, Illinois. And you got to make sure you get it right. As I've told people before, and I shared before, if you pronounce the city wrong, it is considered a misdemeanor. So you don't want to pronounce it wrong.
I remember that.
You remember that. You got to remember that. Or if you're listening here in the city of Saginaw, we certainly thank all of you for being there. And also to those who are on our social media platforms. We say welcome, welcome, welcome. It is an exciting time to be alive. I love this season of the year. I know people are going to hate it, but whenever we get that first dusting of snow or whatever that goes on, people, if you're in the Midwest where you have 4 seasons, now this probably is not the case in places where you're in the hills and there's snow all the time. But when you have 4 seasons, or you don't have 4 seasons, if one of the seasons that you have means that you're going to get snow, it's amazing because people act like they lose their senses and their ability to drive in the time that you don't have snow. And I have seen more accidents and been looking at the police scanners with accidents coming in left and right. And I'm just kind of like, okay, are these all new drivers? No, these are people who have been driving for years, for decades. But when we get that new snow, they just forget you got to slow down. You got to make sure that, first of all, don't be riding around on bald tires. I've seen some of those. But you got to make sure that you take a little bit of time. And if we could just adjust a little quicker to it, we would see that it's not so bad. And I love the snow. It puts me in a festive occasion. Are you getting ready for that end of the year holiday feel? Jonathan, where are you at? Are you just kind of like over it all?
Oh, it's been here. When I drive home from Thanksgiving, it's Christmas time.
So are you a Christmas person?
I enjoy Christmas in my own way. I'm a homeowner this year, so this is my first year putting up Christmas decorations.
So did you do a whole tree?
I have a tree.
Okay, yeah, that's what I mean.
Fake one. Okay, but I have to say, so far the hardest part of home ownership is putting up the outdoor Christmas lights and decorations, and struggling with extension cords. And does this strip of lights work or not? Worst part of home ownership so far.
This is funny because it's been nearly a year that you had a home now, right?
Yeah,
it was earlier in the
February,
year.
Yep.
In February, so we're embarking upon a year that this young man has become a homeowner. This is big news, actually, because considering how difficult it is for folks to buy homes, you were able to work out a situation where you the family home stayed in. You decided, hey, I want to be a homeowner. It was interesting because I remember back in February we had the conversation about you owning a home and didn't have a mailbox, and I was like, how could that even exist in this day and age? You have now navigated the hard world of home ownership. You now have a mailbox that took some time. I remember you said it was a bit more complicated than you thought it was.
Still easier than putting up Christmas lights. I'm 100% on that.
So those who are out there, and you're speaking to a whole different generation, share some of us, and this is totally impromptu, but share with us some of what you have learned since being a homeowner. You're how old? Share with how old you are.
I'm 26.
So 26,
Yep.
your first time homeowner. And so share with us some of the things that you've experienced or learned in the process of home ownership.
Well, I just got another tax bill. It's
the fun part.
I don't know if it's the summer or the winter one, but it's the big one, and it's
we're probably the summer one.
Yep.
Seeing we just ended summer,
it's got me cringing a little bit, but no, it's been a fun experience so far. I thought I would struggle with it more, but from week one, I loved living on my own. Moving out of mom and dad's house, loved every second of it. The fact that everything is now on my shoulders, and if something's messed up, it's my fault and it's my job to fix it. I kind of like that. I've learned how to drywall. Did a whole room with that. I still haven't finished.
Wait a minute, you drywalled the whole room?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
You are adulting.
Yeah, there was some ugly floral wallpaper in there that I went over with drywall. That was an experience and
So let me ask this question. How are you learning these new home ownership skills?
Google.
I knew you were going to say that. So everything. So if there's an issue, you Google it. This is what this generation does.
Yeah.
When there's an issue, Google it. Figure it out.
And if Google doesn't have an immediate answer, call that.
Well, I am excited, and it is fun seeing you adulterate and get to this. I don't know if that's correct word, to see you adult. You are now adulting, and it's cool to see you being able to do that. But we're going to continue. There's so much stuff going on. And it was funny because before we started this show, I heard it over the air about talking about pardons. And unless you have been living under a rock, we are in full discussion between now and January 19th. What's going to happen with the president's pardon power? Already we see that he has pardoned his son. What are your thoughts about that, Jonathan? I didn't want to talk politics, but I want to talk post-politics. So if you're tuning in today, we're going to talk about minority voices post-2024 election. Where are we at? Where's our headspace? What are we thinking? And I want to share, I guess it would be mine because we are not a monolith, so I can't speak for everyone. But I want to share where I am and what my thoughts are concerning what now, what next. But before we get into that, we have seen kind of the post-election situation taking place. Joe Biden pardons his son from the whole big party in the pardon, where you can't come back and throw it back at me ever again kind of pardon power. What are your thoughts?
He said he wasn't going to, and he did. Surprise, surprise.
Did you believe that when he said it?
No.
If I were the president, I'm like, my son's gonna get pardoned. I'm gonna say whatever I got to say at this moment.
Yeah, but you knew if there was a conviction, or if he got jail time, I suspected that a pardon would come out. So I'm not surprised at all to see a pardon come out. I do like in his statement, it was probably the most honest I've seen Joe Biden be, where he said, I hope that you can see as a father and as a president why I would do this. Yep, I respect it. You're a father first, and you have the power of president. It makes sense why you would do that.
I mean, when you consider the relationship that he has with his kids, and how he has tried to be present father, that's a part of his image that he had for his, during the duration of his time in Congress. It's not surprising. I'm going to be very honest with you. There is no way on this planet that if my kids were confronted or facing issues of this nature, that I wouldn't pardon my kids. Well, let me say this. Let me put this in perspective. If it were a situation where my kids were out there just doing dumb stuff and getting caught for it, then, and I felt like, okay, they did it and they should pay for it, then that's what it is. The problem, and this is the only issue I have, but we know rich kids, they don't suffer the plight of us normal folks do anyways. But the problem with this situation is it had become so politicized, and much of this, and I would think that my dad didn't love me if he didn't pardon me, with all of the conversation and rhetoric that had been taking place surrounding him. And I don't think that either side, be it Democrats or Republicans, have handled that well. But I think that, as you said, his statement as a father and as a president, I don't think that anyone would leave up to chance how their child may be targeted as a continuation of a political situation.
Especially someone who, I'll say, has been accused of using political investigations and all of that during their time.
Not even what he's accused of, what he says he's gonna do. I'm gonna get those people. I mean, so I think it would just leave me in a very weird situation. There is no, I don't care, weird or not weird. My kids are, if I'm the president and I have the ability to pardon, I think like most people
would
that
you
are
do
around
it even
there,
if they didn't do anything? Just give them a full pardon just in case something comes up down the line.
just in case they lose their mind. Come on over here, all y'all getting pardoned. I'm pardoning you forever. I mean, it is. I mean, but I think that most parents, if we put politics aside, most parents wouldn't want to see their kids be in a situation. If they could stop the judge from hitting the gavel and sentencing them, they would do it. And so being able to hindsight, which we say hindsight is 2020. If you can go back and undo some things, I think most people in their heartstrings would tug them to be able to do that very same thing. So I'm not tripping about that. However, as we talk about that, there has now been an expanded conversation, which I think is very interesting. And I think that we are moving toward a place of constitutionality and things being challenged to the Supreme Court when we start talking about pardoning, a wider perspective of pardoning some of these individuals like Liz Cheney and some of those individuals who have spoken out and been quite vocal and possibly could be attacked by number 47. Well, I got to go from 45 to 47. Number 47, if he comes into office. What are your thoughts about that, Jonathan? That's a different spin.
I think there's a lot of bluster and a lot of taking words out of context when it comes to Donald Trump. He says stupid things that he's not going to follow up on. We saw that in 2016 when he got into office. He said he was going to do this and that and that and this. And unlike most politicians where every promise was a lie, he just said a bunch of stupid stuff.
I want to stop you because I think we often say that, but we also say the thing that I appreciate about Donald Trump is the thing that you just kind of undid.
Well,
because I think that he does what he says for the most part.
Yes. The promises that he made in terms of policy, he went and he did those. The ones where he's like, I'm gonna turn the moon blue.
Yeah,
he didn't actually say that, but you know how he talks out of his rear often. I think this is kind of one of those things, and I think it's something that is definitely getting overblown. I haven't heard him say anything about going after like Liz Cheney or any of that. But my question, I guess the question is, what do you think about that? Because I struggle with this pardon power that we give the president. To some degree, they've gotten so much more power than that since having the pardon that pales in comparison.
Yeah. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit today. I don't want to be political on today because let's just say, look, can we get a break from politics for a while? And I know that we can't.
There's a difference between talking about government and talking about politics.
There we go. That's the thin line that I would like to tread.
Yep.
On today's conversation, because I don't think I have one about politics. I can't take it. But I look at that and I'm concerned about where's the limit now. one thing that I'm going to tell you that when he was number 45, he did, and now becoming number 47, is that he's like, listen, we're going to do this. And the things that he said he was going to do, he hunkered down, did them. Everybody, oh, you can't do that. He was like, watch me. And he did them. And it was so funny because, and I can't say the word that I really want to say, when number 46, when Mr. Sleepy Joe came in, he tiptoed around a lot of things. And this is what really ticked me off, because there were bills, and I've talked about the bills, the voting rights bill, all of those things that were important to Black folk, that became unimportant. And I said, if they don't get done within the first 90 days, they're not done with an executive pen and pushed through this situation or put before Congress in a very strong way, that they were never going to happen, because something more important was going to happen. And we're talking about like the John Lewis bills, all those voting rights regulations and changes and bills, the things that should have been done very clearly. And then what happens? We get entangled in Ukraine and all this other stuff. And as I said, it was no longer an issue and no longer of importance. And one of the reasons why I believe that there is no longer a Democratic president in the White House. And there's been a lot of conversation about messaging and what they've said. But what I do want to say, Jonathan, is this, and we're going to get to the meat and potatoes of our conversation. And you tell me what I'm going to say this, and I honestly feel this. And I want to know what your thoughts are concerning this. During the election process, the cost of milk, remember, it was the cost of eggs and the cost of a gallon of milk. It was the taxes, the gas is too high, all of those things, right? People can't afford the basic things that they need. And those were the reasons. People just can't make it. We're struggling to put food on the table. And then there's a changing of the administration, some surprises, which we'll talk about in a minute. But we see in that change, after the change, Thanksgiving, we experience and we see record numbers in terms of what was spent on Black Friday, increased by 33%. But all of the holiday spending was setting records and paces. So it was never an election, as my perspective, about kitchen table issues. It wasn't about the cost of milk. It wasn't about the cost of a carton of eggs. And so when I look at this, and a part of our conversation that we'll have today is I want to have a real conversation about what this election was really about. So where I am as a Black man post this election, because I think that I learned a lot about our country that I didn't learn it. I think that there was something that became quite clear that I had always felt, that I was always told you shouldn't feel that way about the situation. But anyways, when you think about this, was this about butter, eggs, milk, and those things, the cost of those things? And how can we say that if we're spending like these exorbitant amount of money just 30 days later?
I think unlike a lot of previous elections that I've seen, I haven't seen too many presidential elections in my time, but I think unlike many of the ones that in the past, this election wasn't just about that. There were different issues that different people cared about. The U.S.'s position in the world and how we were viewed on the world stage and how we interacted with other countries. That was.
Do you think that was important?
I think it was.
I think that was very little important. Go ahead.
I think the major line being towed was prices and all of that. But I also think if you look post-election, how much of that has to do with sentiment and just psychology and people thinking that, things are going to be better now. They're not going to be better for months. Things are not going to, they might not be better.
Right. Facts.
Facts,
right.
Things might not make any changes for months, but it's just the psychology and feeling and sentiment that drives so much of that. And that's why that kind of thing is measured when they're talking economics, is consumer sentiment, employer sentiment.
And that's the key. What is the sentiment? And what I will say is, in this entire process, I was just like, if this election is going to be on messaging, wow, it's lopsided because one side is not getting it right. They couldn't even say clearly what their policies were that were doing well. and they allow those to be taken away from them. But I'm looking at some of the comments that we have in our social media stream, and it's interesting. Someone is saying that Trump is getting ready to show you how much power a president really has. And if we look at what we have dealt with as it relates to the Supreme Court decision on what a president can do under the scope of his presidential powers, it's kind of scary when we look at, at what a president now has in terms of his full power and what he's able to do and not be held accountable for. And I'm just talking, not just talking about this since number 47 is coming into office, Mr. Trump's coming into office, but I'm talking about this in general moving forward, the precedents that has now been set. What do you think about that? And do you think, because so many people, and this is going to come up, are really pushing Donald Trump to really make sure and maximize and push the limits of to what he's able to do as a president. Do you think we'll see that in this administration?
I think he's going to lash out as much as he can in the first 6 months. He's going to throw the book at whoever he thinks needs a book thrown at them, and after that it'll kind of die down. I don't think it's going to turn into full on, martial law, full on oppression of people. That's not the kind of thing that we're looking at. The kind of thing that we're looking at is executive orders as it relates to the border.
Yeah.
And that is nothing new.
Yeah. No, and I'm not disagreeing with you. Right.
And, but when it comes up that he's signing all these executive orders. Well, duh.
I wish Joe Biden would have signed more. I think that there's been a precedent to this set. Like, listen, people are just like, if something is important to you, you're just going to sign an executive order, deal with it later. And so I think
that is wrong.
I know, I agree that it's wrong.
Yeah.
But that has become the way that we operate. Yep. And as we talk about this, we're not talking politics. We're talking about how our government is operating. I don't think that this is in the fabric or the garment, or the understanding of how our founding fathers intended for this thing to work. And it leaves me to pause, because there is a real fear that the election is over and the fight for democracy looms on, because we are allowing certain things like that to become a part of how an administration or a president operates, instead of really challenging our president to be presidential and get back to what the Constitution would say in terms of his power.
And that's part of the problem behind party politics is as soon as Biden got into office and started signing executive orders, Congress wasn't going to say, hold on, we got to stop these executive order things, because Congress was Democrat.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
And even if it wasn't the opposite party or whatever, they would say, we don't want to limit the executive order. We don't want to limit the presidential power too much, because what happens when we get it? We want to have that power. And the three branches of government were supposed to work in opposition to each other.
What?
And they don't.
Now I'm going to give you, we got a minute left. I'm going to give you 50 seconds of this next minute to talk about that. Are we in a problematic situation with the consistency of the Supreme Court and with number 47 in terms of moving forward with this administration?
I think the Supreme Court is probably the least affected by collusion between the three branches of government, but I think they're still affected, obviously, if you have appointees.
Vice versa, not the Supreme Court being affected, but the presidency being affected by the decisions of the Supreme Court.
I hope that the presidency is affected by the decisions of the Supreme Court. That's why the three branches were set up, to be in opposition to one another. I don't know.
Okay.
I really don't know how to answer that.
Well, that was one of my question. You kind of did, but my concern was that there's supposed to be this working tension between the three, but I seem to believe that two of those bodies are now working together. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back with Minority Voices post 2024. I'm struggling with my tongue. We'll be right back.
You're listening to United Shades of Gray on WSGW.
This is Kareem, and we're back with more United Shades of Gray, conversations of race in America. Today, we're going to talk about what my minority voice feels post 2024. All folks may not feel the same way, and we saw that as it relates with what took place. Now, I do want to bring at the start of this conversation, I want to put some things into perspective, which will kind of help give some clarity as to why I'm saying what I'm saying. All right. Before the break, we were talking, and I was saying how the entire conversation from those who said that they could not vote for Kamala Harris was because of her economic policies. And the most important things was the economy and all of these different things. And so what has happened has now happened. We have cast our vote. But looking back at how we have cast our vote and where we are currently, and some of the conversation that was taking place before, as an individual who likes to examine things and taking a look at percentages and how people voted, and looking at the fact that Black women voted overwhelmingly for Kamala Harris. No surprise. I think the numbers would have been higher if she would not have been a woman. But I think that the moment her being a part of historic Black colleges, her being one of the historic fraternal sorority or organizations, a Divine Nine, the AKAs, all of those things helped Black women solidify around her, and they could see themselves in her. So their numbers were through the roof, as expected. We saw that Black men showed up, and for the most part, Black men voted as we thought they would. The majority of them voted, 80%, 80.5% of folks, Black men, voted for Kamala Harris. And we saw that about 19-20% of them voted for Donald Trump. I would like to think the number was closer to 20 than 19, but 20% of Black men voted for Donald Trump, but overwhelmingly Black men voted for Donald Trump. No surprise, we saw that white men voted for Donald Trump, as we expected them to, actually in greater numbers than anticipated or actually perceived initially through the early polling. But that was not a surprise. The surprise comes in when we look at the votes of white women. And white women, many may say, have voted against their issues or their own rights to support Donald Trump. They voted with their white husbands. And it's interesting. And most people like, oh, what's the big deal? There is a big deal. There's a concern here. Because when we talk about women's rights and the rights to their bodies and all of those other issues, it's been the white women who have been the proponents voting and standing and carrying the torch of that conversation, even though the detriment of the outcomes of abortions have plagued communities of and particularly Black folk. And so, we can look at those things. So what it appears when I begin to look at this, and Jonathan, you're very welcome to jump in and give some dialogue as we have this conversation, is that when we were talking about, it was about eggs, it was about milk, it was about the cost of gas, it was about being able to afford. And then we look, in retrospect to the spending that took place, it was about none of those things, because when we don't have money to do things, discretionary spending is the first thing to go. And we saw that with the holiday season, discretionary spending has been through the roof. A lot of what has been communicated poorly by many of other individuals as it relates to the economy's doing well, not necessarily Main Street, has become the focus post-election. And things like Bitcoin losing and going crazy, the stock market going crazy. Those have been things that we are now celebrating when it was problematic before. Now, that's the premise. Is there something that, is there anything in that premise that you would like to, that you would disagree with?
In terms, I have a question about, you talked about white women voting primarily for Trump, you said against their own interests.
Yeah.
And it made me think, and this is the first time I've thought about this perspective of it, but think about this perspective of it. If you're a white woman who has historically voted Republican, you voted Democrat for abortion rights. Abortion rights got kicked back to the states in 2020 or 2022. You voted in your state elections to, like in Michigan, enshrine right to abortion in the state constitution. If you're that one issue voter, you did it. You've got it. You've got abortion rights in the state of Michigan. Why wouldn't you vote on other issues?
Well, because if that were the conversation, I'd agree with that. If that were the positioning, and this is the problem that Black America has had with white America for a very long time. You often say one thing in public or say what is politically correct or what is expedient in a moment, but then when we get behind closed doors, behind votes, and I see this even on the Democratic side, as they were so impassioned about, like I said, the John Lewis bill, we're going to get this taken care of. And that's what we say because it is politically expedient in a moment. But when it comes time to vote, their interest or how they vote wanes or changes. And what I'm saying is that changing, it wasn't a change. It was where they actually were for the long time. I think it's where they were actually at. But they were trying to be, we don't want to have an issue with her. So we're going to stand with her as it relates to this. But when it came time to vote, we see that happening. And when I look at that, I just want to begin to unpack this conversation in a way, because when I look at all of the millions of people who have voted and everything that has come out, and we look at these numbers, it's interesting to me because there has been, and we'll talk about Donald Trump and some of his administration picks. Because what we saw happen was that there was almost not a deep-throated, disavowing of Project 2025, but a strong push away from Project 2025. I don't know what it is. I don't know that, man. I don't know what Project 2025 is. And now we look at some things that are now happening in terms of folks that are being looked at and put into positions that were architects of Project 2025. We look at, and this it came up in our social media stream, the attack on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which has been going on for a while. Now, I'll say the letters DEI were a creative way for us to talk about how this was important and to position the conversation about, does there need to be equity in employment? Does there need to be equity in education? Do we need to have these places where they are equitable for all folks? And so DEI became the new way of saying it because affirmative action became the boogeyman. And so what I'm saying about this post-election conversation is that most of this conversation, I think, from my perspective, in my head as a Black man, when I look at this, a large part of what I see is a fear of losing control, a fear of too much equity, too fast, too soon, and a retrograde to things that look like the 60s, and even undoing some of those things. And I think that a lot of that, the feeling or the sentiment, and this is just me talking, I could be completely wrong, but since I said that this is a voice of minorities post 2024, my sentiment is that fear of losing control, fear of giving too many opportunities, fear of a level playing field, cause many individuals to retreat to a place to where their thinking is back to where we were decades ago.
Let me provide an alternative point of view.
Absolutely. That's why I'm having this conversation with you.
Here's kind of where I think of it. I think that DEI, in the same way as affirmative action, started out great intentions, and many of the programs are doing fantastic things to improve, to allocate resources to people who need them. And that is a just goal. And a lot of these programs are doing that. Where I think it was perceived to overstep is when, and there have been...
By whom?
Let me get to that.
That's an important question.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm going to
Okay.
answer that
Go
question
ahead.
in just a second.
Okay.
Was when, and there have been documented cases of people who are benefiting from these programs taking positions, or think about it as places in a university. That's where it popped up kind of the most, but also in the workplace. There have been documented cases where someone who was let into that space because of DEI and not on merit, and someone who would have made it on merit was locked out. The Asian American community disproportionately affected by that kind of thing. Caucasians also affected by it, but I think that when that started popping up,
Wait.
that's where the fear came from.
Wait. We got to
Yep,
reverse.
yep.
You said when. I just go back to this last piece that you said, that who was being affected by this? You said that there was a particular people group that was affected.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what
we're
said.
talking white people
Okay.
and Asian Americans.
How are they being affected?
Their positions that they quote unquote earned are being given to people in the name of DEI.
Positions that white people earned were being given to DEI. I'm gonna need you to explain what you mean by that, because that's confusing. But I think that many feel that way.
When you start getting quotas, and we've talked about the checking boxes issue before on this show.
Yep.
But when you start getting quotas, when you start seeing, oh, this person is from an impoverished community, therefore we judge them by a different standard than we judge other people.
Why must there be a different standard?
That's a great question. But there is one.
Who says that there's a different standard? That might be the better way to ask that question.
Universities. I won't say employers, because there's certain things about that, but there's definitely, it's taken into consideration when maybe it shouldn't be.
Okay.
And
so, go ahead.
And the fear comes in there, and as an overreaction to that, as an overreaction to what people think is an overstep, that's where you see the level it all, DEI is the boogeyman. There's a segment of it that probably is toxic, but all in all, like the concept itself doesn't need to be leveled.
Okay, what we're talking about in this conversation, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because I think these kind of conversations are very important, because we have, and someone made an allusion, Mr. Bulls made an allusion to MLK and his stance on white moderates and well-intended white folks, and how they tend to run back to certain principles when under fire. And I want to kind of go back to something, because you mentioned affirmative action, and one of the biggest misinformations was that affirmative actions, the greatest benefactor of affirmative action, were Black people, which is, the numbers have never shown that. The greatest benefactor of affirmative action were white women. And let me tell you the problem with that, because it was designed to bring access and equity. And those words are different than equal, because I think white America has no issue with things being equal now. Okay, you should be able to go to school, I can go to school. You get this, I get it. They don't mind equal. But equity is a very different understanding, because equity takes into consideration that since the beginning of this amazing nation, there have been doors that have been closed to Black folk. And I'm not talking about BIPOC or people of color. I'm talking about Black folks. Doors have been closed. And there's a reason why I have to differentiate between African-American descendants of slaves, Black people, and international Africans that come from other countries. Because when we look at what has taken place, white women have been the biggest benefactor from affirmative action. As it began to look at the educational processes and the benefits, the next group would be Black people that are not African-American descendants of slaves. Because it's sad that a people group that has given so much and has done so much to make this nation great are overlooked. Now, Africans that come from international, they are very different. Their philosophies are not the same as those who are part of the slave culture, that are descendants of that slave culture from here in this country. They are not the same. They often come with great influence of finances and resources. And so they're treated differently. And so we saw a benefit. And to many other cultures, Black is Black, but there is a very different, because Africans who came from Africa did not have the same plight or the benefit or the contribution to this nation that African American descendants of slaves have had. So when we look at these things, I think it's important to look at apples to apples. When we see the emergence of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the real benefit to those who believed in DE&I, it was not about taking a job, because no one has ever been like, we're going to take away your job that you've earned and give it to someone else. That's never happened in the existence of any type of program that has tried
And
to
I
create
need to make
equity.
it clear that's not what I was saying.
Well, I just want to make sure that we understand that. But what we are dealing with is this concept, and I'll say this to you, and I hope that you understand what I'm saying, because most people will be offended by the front cover of it. But I think that we have an understanding, a relationship where we can say this. What is offensive is what I consider and what is a white supremacist mentality of understanding enough is enough. I know when enough is enough, and I know when good is good, and I know when a program has run its course, because we've allowed this to go too far. Do you understand what I'm saying when I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know what you're saying.
Okay. So I think that is a very important place, because that's why I asked you who, when you said it's gone too far, when they have made the decision that's gone too far. I said, who's made the decision? And so when the powers that be, because when we look at it, if Black people are ever going to achieve equity in this country, it requires a large portion of white people to understand that there are things that we have a responsibility for, whether you owned a slave or whether your parents owned a slave or not, but to provide equity and access to the American dream, because there's so many folks that are of color that are still suffering and spiraling from the tenets and the tentacles of what took place, for 400 years, but then again, 200 years in this great nation. And we have to understand that sometimes it may feel a little different when the pool is bigger and the choice selection is bigger. It doesn't mean that you are less qualified or they're less qualified. It simply means that we've got to open up the pool. And I think that my dear friends on the other side of the aisle struggle with understanding that philosophy, and it feels like an attack. And I understand. This is the thing. I'm empathetic to that understanding, even though I don't agree with it, but I certainly understand where that comes from.
Here's a question. I don't work in this space. You do.
Yeah.
How much of DEI programming is through federal or state government funding or direct government
Why does that make a difference?
oversight? Because that is the extent of, if people are saying they're coming for DEI, that is the extent of what would go away.
Okay, so this is the problem with that, because Black folk that were here in this country weren't just done wrong by individuals. And this is where we come up with this concept, with many people struggle with the understanding of what systemic racism is. And let me finish, because we weren't just done by Mr. Johnny, the plantation owner. We were done wrong by the United States government. A government in its inaction when it was created fundamentally did not recognize Black people as whole people. So when it talks about we the people, it's not referring to we the people. It's talking to my white friends, ancestors who got together to say that this is going to be a more perfect union. It wasn't until the adoption of certain things that we said, you know what, this is kind of jacked up. We created a whole nation, and we created all of these rights, and we provided these rights and these opportunities to this entire nation, and we overlooked these people. And so we began to do amendments and all of these other things to try and correct which was a part of the system. And so what I'm saying is that America's system is not broken. The fact that there are inequities that are in this country and that exist for people of color, especially Black folks, is not broken. It's how the system was intended to operate. And so when we talk about systemic racism, we're talking about the white supremacist attitude that existed that says that you're not a whole human until we say that you're a whole human. And that philosophy has become integrated. If it's in your laws, it's in every aspect of how you operate. It's in every aspect of America, because racism is not in the individual. Racism is in the laws.
You just said two different things. You said the system is not broken.
No, it's not. It's operating the way that it was intended to operate.
And okay, but you're saying that it was intended to operate to oppress Black people.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so when we when we look at where we are, bringing this full speed ahead into our current conversations, and we think about things like Project 2025, and we look at the elimination of the Department of Education. Why do we know that's important? Because down there, what's the family in Grand Rapids? She was over Department of Education, DeVos. They wanted to do it before, so we understand that that is a target to do away with public education. When we look at issues of how laws are disseminated and who should be forced to go to the military and who shouldn't, those things have typically been places, because I don't have the ability, because of my historic trauma, to be able to afford an education in this place. So I go serve in a military, which means now I'm fighting for a nation who doesn't see me fully the way that I need to be seen. I put myself on the front line for a nation that I come back and then don't even receive the full benefits that other folks have happened. There's something that has happened, and I'm extremely excited about this now, because we see Black veterans for the first time being able to receive the benefits, the full benefit package of what it means to be an American veteran. That never took place before. We're seeing it happen. So when I look at things like Project 2025 and I see them disavow those things, the protections, I'm going to tell you the first thing, anything to do with equity is the first thing out the window. We saw that happening before. We see, once again, an administration that is put together. There were 3 people in the first administration of number 45. There are 3 folks of quote unquote color in this current one. The only Black individual was a Black man from Texas. And sometimes I struggle to figure out if they really understand who they are. There was no lessons learned from individuals who were Black men like Tim Scott, who put themselves on the line thinking that they actually had a shot to appear in this administration, but they were used as puppets. And this is my perspective, to get into office, but we do not see a place for them in this administration. So as a Black individual going into this place, I think that if you are not a part of the Donald Trump world of living, it may be a rocky 4 years. And I think that there is a need for our white American counterparts, because all white people are not, all white people are racist. All white people may suffer from some white supremacist understanding that they have to overcome, but that doesn't make them bad people. We need those who lean in with Black folks to lean in with Black folks. We need them to be outraged and not selectively outraged. We need them to be honest, because if you think about how we were thinking we were standing in a coalition, and a key portion of that coalition does not show up in the voting booth, it becomes problematic in terms of our trust as we continue to move forward. So this is only a part of our conversation. We're going to continue this conversation. I'm going to bring some people in so that we can continue to dissect this, because even though this is a problem, I think that all of us are going to have to work together to really begin to right this ship. There is more at stake. And we said this before, that does not go away. There is more at stake than just the presidential election, the very fabric of our nation, how we operate as a country, the political system as well as the judicial system are also vitally important. I want to thank you guys for continually tuning in. This is Kareem, United Shades of Gray. God bless you. Grace and peace.